Hello, I'm Ed Rain, President and CEO of Food for the Poor. Food for the Poor is one of the largest relief and development organizations in the US, serving the poor in 17 countries in the Caribbean and Latin America. And we are so blessed to serve alongside you, the CEEP community, Episcopal churches, dioceses, and organizations who are mission-minded and desire to break the cycle of poverty. I would like to share a video with you about the ways we are transforming lives and why your help is more important than ever.
I like Food for the Poor because we help people build houses, rooms, schools. So I thank Food for the Poor.
The people of this community are from very poor background. Every family can own their own home.
With this project, all the community can have water.
Thank you very much what you're doing for to my country, to bring all kind of help us. Yes, God bless you. Bless.
Give a man a fish and you feed him for the day. Teach him how to fish and you give him an occupation that will sustain him throughout his lifetime. This is an ancient proverb, but it still holds true today and defines the work we do here at Food for the Poor. Since 1982, Food for the Poor has been working tirelessly to lift the poor out of poverty, giving them the training and tools they need to make sustainable changes that will benefit their families and communities for generations to come. When you partner with Food for the Poor, you can help address sustainable development goals, such as ending poverty and hunger, reducing inequality, clean water, sanitation, renewable energy, meeting medical needs, and providing a path to prosperity with education and sustainable development. When you provide a gift of time, talent, or treasure to Food for the Poor, you are making an investment in a person, a family, and a community. Your contribution multiplies with time as our projects grow. Food for the Poor empowers the poor, giving them the tools to break the cycle of poverty.
Bishop Michael Curry, whom you'll see in a moment, has invigorated us all to be the Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement. We are united in God's loving, liberating, life-giving work.
Good afternoon. I am Kathy Walker, and I will be the moderator for today's conversation between two giants in our church and two tremendous gifts to the worldwide community. I am honored to introduce the Most Reverend Michael Curry, Presiding Bishop and Primate for the Episcopal Church, and Dr. Catherine Meeks, Executive Director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while. I am really excited to be with you all today. So let's start here. 2020, as we know, was a really tough year. A lot of dueling pandemics in our nation and across the world, in fact. And of course, we brought that with us on into 2021. But now, as we think about the insurrection that took place in the Capitol on January 6th, I think that may be really top of mind for so many of us at this moment that it seems fitting that we're having a conversation at this CEEP conference where its theme is, for a time such as this, the church as witness. So my question for you both is, what kind of time is this that we're living through at this moment? And as a faith community, how are we being called to respond to this time? And I'll start with you, Bishop Curry.
Well, again, thank you for having me, and it really is, it's always a joy for me to be with Dr. Meeks. It really is. You know, I mean, just that phrase, for such a time as this, comes from the Hebrew scriptures from the book of Esther. And it is a moment when the Jewish people are threatened with genocide by the political powers of their day. That Esther, who has had the privilege of living in the big house, as we would say from the African-American slave past, she was actually able to live in the big house. She wasn't out in the field. She was in the house. And she was there, and it was a privileged position. When the Jewish people were in trouble, it was when Mordecai came to her, who was kind of her godfather, who watched out for her adopted father even. He came to her and he said, Esther, you must now use your clout, your influence to save our people. And he says, who knows but that you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. We who are the church are in this particular moment for such a time as this. Whether we like it or not, whether we wanted to or not, this is what we got. And we like to talk about God calling us, but it's always to something nice and new. This time, God has called us to this moment, to this dangerous moment for this democracy, where many of the sins of our past, our racist past, our bigoted past, our unjust past, many of those sins have simply been revealed. They've been there, but they've been revealed. And what we saw on January the 6th was, unfortunately, on the Feast of the Manifestation of Jesus Christ to the Gentiles, otherwise known as Epiphany, there was another manifestation, a manifestation of deep hurts, of deep evils, and a deep history that all of a sudden bubbled to the surface in an unholy way, where the temple of democracy itself was desecrated. Mm-hmm. That's what happened on January 6th. And we who are the church must represent the face and the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, not the Christ of culture, not the Christ of Christian nationalism, not the Christ of white supremacy, not the Christ of complicity with any empire, I don't care. We must represent Jesus, who is the Christ. And I remember I can't remember what play it was from, but it was either Sir Thomas More or Cardinal Wolsey. One of them, somebody from our English historical past, said, "I remain the king's loyal servant, but God's first."
Yeah. And Bishop Michael, I love every word you've said and agree completely, and would just add that I have been saying for a pretty good while that when Donald Trump stood in front of St. John's Episcopal Church holding up the Bible, that for me was God's letter. You know, it's almost like, did y'all not get it already? Did you not get that you are called to stand up taller and to be something new and different here for me in this mess that's going on? And while people were being outraged that, you know, the president would use our building for a photo op, I was sitting here kind of shaking in my shoes saying the invitation from God is being profoundly given to us as a communion. And I feel the same way about the insurrection at the Capitol. I hope we won't allow our outrage about the act to make us not pay attention to what the invitation is, what the message is, because we can lament and carry on and be angry and hurt and made crazy about what happened enough that then we don't ever do anything to fix what caused it in the first place. And we're real good at that. We're real good at carrying on so much about a thing until we don't ever get to the core of what was this about in the first place. And I just think that as Christians, we don't get to gloss over it. We don't get to make it into what we want it to be. Just as you've said, we've got to look the stuff straight in the face and hear what God's calling us to. And we're not going to get away with not doing it. I just don't think. I mean, God just likes authenticity. So this is an invitation to greater authenticity. That's how I see the pandemic and the political unrest, all of it, that it's time for us to step up to the plate to be who we claim we are. You know, if we're going to claim it, we're going to have to be it, or God's going to make us claim who we really are.
I like that. And so here's a question. For a long time now, we've tried to make people very comfortable in church, right? We didn't want people didn't want to be upset anymore. So we adopted sort of this vision of Jesus, that he was all loving, everything was wonderful. So if we're living into this moment, and if God is calling us to be who we really are, what does that look like? And how does that distinguish between what a friend of mine calls our temptation to want to just have juicy Jesus, loving Jesus?
I love it.
I've never heard of that before. Juicy Jesus. Gosh.
That's good. Well, you know, J.B. Phillips wrote a book called Your God's Too Small. And I think that when we do that to Jesus, we try to reduce Jesus to fit us. rather than allowing God to make us fit into God's vision for us. And we've been doing that for a very long time. And the whole religious world does that. And it's a part of what I'm sure, gets to God, that we just rather kind of play around and try to invent the God we want to have. And that's never worked. And I don't know when we're going to wake up and just realize that it's not rocket science to figure out what it means to follow Jesus Christ. I keep saying all the time, take the Bible up into your hands and read the New Testament, and you will figure out what you're supposed to be doing, and then go do it. And I love, Bishop Michael, the last time when we were together speaking, and you said people needed to stop talking about what would Jesus do and look at what Jesus did, and go do that. Because when you talk about what would Jesus do, you get to modulate that through your own ego filter and decide what would Jesus do given the 21st century. No, what did Jesus do when Jesus was here? Yeah. And what is Jesus asking me to do about that? Are far better questions. And I love that. I've been repeating you for a good number of days now, because I just thought that was such a wonderful thing, a wonderful distinction to make, because, we made a whole industry out of what would Jesus do. And of course, people weren't trying to do what he would do even then. But yeah. I think that the bottom line always comes back to authenticity. Yeah. Don't play. If you're going to do it, be authentic. If you're not going to do it, then be authentic. And then people will know that they can't trust you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have to admit, in full disclosure, I got that phrase from Bishop Scott Hayashi of Utah. He was the one that taught that, shared that with me. And I think it's right on. I do think it's important, back to Kathy's friend, thinking about that, to remember Jesus was all loving, but his love wasn't a Hallmark greeting card. It wasn't that. It was the kind of love that would sacrifice self-interest to help to accomplish the good of others. That's what the cross is about. That's what the cross is about. A sacrificial love. We've seen that kind of love demonstrated on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We saw it demonstrated in those who sacrifice sometimes life itself, but sometimes physical well-being for voting rights and human equality and equity in this society and in this world. We've seen it around the world. And so in one sense, what happens is it's kind of like a friend of mine talks about the Disneyfication of Martin Luther King, where we turn Martin Luther King into a Disney character. Now, I'm not against Disney. I mean, I had kids. I had 2 daughters. Trust me, I've seen enough of The Little Mermaid or whatever she was called. Her and Pocahontas for enough lifetime. I mean, there's a place for that. But when we take people like Dr. King or Fannie Lou Hamer, although that is harder to do with Fannie Lou Hamer, but people like that, and we turn them into Disney characters that are just sweet and saccharine, if you will, that is a violation of who they were and are. And the apostles of real love who dared to follow in the footsteps of Jesus have turned the world upside down. Mahatma Gandhi was acting in love at the Salt March. He was acting in love in his protests. You see what I mean? So that this love is, as I think it was Paul Tillich who actually said, the public face of love is justice. And that's what Jesus did. And you're right, Dr. Meeks. What he did is the precedent for how we must live our lives now in our time. And that's tougher. That is hard to do. I mean, I wish I could sit here and claim that I'm just a saintly human being. I wish I was, but I'd be like, my nose would be like Pinocchio and hit the screen. The truth is, I fall short consistently and regularly. But I'm going to press on toward the mark, as Paul says, of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. And that is our call as church. And it's not easy. I mean, God knows it's not easy. Because, for example, those who participate in trying to change the structures of the world must also do so by loving those who perpetuate even the evil of the structures of those world, while at the same time they must work to change them. That is hard to do. It is hard to do that. I mean, I like to say you have to learn how to stand with integrity and kneel with humility all at the same time. And that those two postures don't even normally go together. And yet, that's what Jesus of Nazareth said. He says, you shall be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves.
And you know, Bishop Michael, the other rub is that while you fight against the structure, you've got to live in the structure.
Yeah.
And resist it. And so I think one of the places that we get caught so badly is in the energy of paradox. You know, that you're standing against something that you're resisting. You're resisting and you're trying to change this, but you live in it. Yes. And so it's so easy not to just let yourself be taken over by it. I mean, it creates such dissonance. So I understand why people choose not to do it. And I feel like that's one of the places where the church is most lacking in helping to teach people that this is what you're called to. You're not called to come and figure out what you like here and take what you like and leave what you don't like. You know, you can't name things as political so you can put them over there on the side and you don't have to deal with it. This is about your spiritual journey, and it's a paradoxical journey, and you're going to be disturbed and it's going to be tough, but that's what we've been promised, to have the grace, to be given the grace to do what we need to do. And I think that we don't say those things enough in clear enough terms within the walls of the church house for people to understand that that's what this is all about. They've got all kinds of mixed up notions about what the church is supposed to be doing. And we're not doing a good enough job of delineating that truth, because we get caught in the first time somebody accuses a priest of being political, the priest is ready to run and hide. And you can't do that. You've got to stand there and help people work their way through understanding. If you pick up the New Testament and look at Jesus Christ, you'll stop calling things political. As a matter of fact, one young priest said to me, I've got all these people in my church that are worried about socialism and they want to talk about, socialism. And I said, well, introduce them to Jesus and they'll be glad to take socialism, because Jesus's mandate is far more rigorous than the philosophy of socialism about the way you're supposed to live. So I think if people ever caught a really good glimpse of what Jesus had to say, they would think socialism was probably a piece of cake.
You remind me of something I heard Jim Forbes say one time. He said, folk get all upset about tithing. He said, but if you look at the real New Testament standard in the Acts of the Apostles, when they were living off of the precedent of Jesus, it says at one point they gave everything they had. He said, something, tithing is a cheaper alternative.
Absolutely.
And I must have, and one of the things I'm aware of, and you are, I mean, I'm not buttering you up, but my knowing you over time, you have had the ability to hold us to loving accountability. That is the kind of accountability that is not to hurt and harm, but to help us be what we can really be, what God really calls us to be. And it just seems to me that is a gift that Christian community must have, so that we can all walk what is intrinsically a countercultural and a counterintuitive walk. It's not, I mean, I don't love my enemies by nature. I don't, and so I need help to do that. I need help to be honest. How does, I must work to change. I really believe we have all been put here not to leave the world the way we found it. Absolutely. Otherwise, why are we here? Really? My daddy used to say, Lord didn't put you here just to consume oxygen. Right. We are here to alter it for the good, and to be honest enough to say there are times when Michael don't want to alter it because Michael likes it the way it is sometimes. Right. And Michael is complicit with the way it is. So I got to fess up and be honest, and yet not wallow in just feeling good because I was honest, saying, okay, what have I learned? Like James Weldon Johnson says, what the dark past has taught us. What have I learned so that I may turn and work to change and transform myself as well as our communities and our world. And all of that. See, Jesus, I have to admit, there's a part of me that sometimes think, I'm not sure I would have wanted to be one of those disciples hanging out with Jesus, because he loved them, but he was rough with them.
Yeah.
I mean, he was probably, I know there must have been many a time when they said, Lord, can you just like lighten up so we can just
Really?
like,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well, like when he was telling them to feed those 5,000 people and they said, look, do you know what you're saying? We don't have
Yeah.
but this little bit of food here. I
Yeah.
absolutely agree with you. I'm sure they were saying, what is he about to do now?
Yes.
You know?
Okay.
I want to just take you back just a little bit because I'm loving this conversation. But I'm thinking about the paradox that you were talking about just a moment ago. And so when you look at the paradox of the wide range of opinions that we have within our church structure, and the two of you interact with these people all the time, we know that everybody does not agree that our loving God is calling all of us to equality and to justice. And we have that with the people in the pews in some of our churches, honestly, and some of the people in our pulpits. So the question for me is, how do you address those folks who are still not even ready to have these conversations or don't believe that we need to have these conversations just yet?
I want the chief pastor to speak first.
Oh, okay. I was gonna defer to you, but you know, let me tell you something. This has nothing to do with whether somebody's a Republican or a Democrat. It has nothing to do with whether somebody's conservative or liberal. It has to do with, am I really trying with all of my might and all of the grace that God can give me to follow in the footsteps of Jesus, to do in my life as Jesus did in his time, to follow his precedent for living. And am I really willing to do that? And so if I am a member of a legislature in enacting matters of public policy, am I doing so in a manner that is consistent with the teachings of Jesus? I mean, see, that's Mary Miller of blessed memory, who was a member in my congregation, who at one time was with the Episcopal Peace Fellowship. And Mary used to tell me all the time, everybody loves Christmas, Jesus, but nobody wants to talk about what the baby did when he grew up, what he talked about when he grew up. And, you know, Jesus said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, that has to do with how you and I relate to each other, Dr. Meeks, but it also has to do with legislation that we pass. Is it consistent with that simple standard? Are you doing to others what you would want somebody to do to you or to your own kin? You said, this ain't complicated. Now, and that has nothing to do with whether you're liberal or conservative. There are liberal solutions to our problems and conservative solutions to our problems. You see what I get? And folks want to pigeonhole in that. No, pigeonhole me with Jesus. And that's my challenge, that Jesus is the testing ground, his teachings, and not just the abstract Christ. That you can make that Christ in your image any way you want. As Dr. Meeks said, the one of the New Testament. Talk to, like my grandmother used to say, have a little talk with Jesus. That Jesus, on the Jesus of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. The Jesus of the parable of the sheep and the goats. The Jesus who says, woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites. You tithe mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. Now that Jesus, let's have a little talk with Jesus. And so that's where I go. And it's not an accident that I say we have got to focus on the teachings of this Jesus, his example, his spirit as the standard for what it means to say I'm a Christian. And if I don't want to be a Christian, that's fine. It's a free country. We have freedom of religious expression. You don't have to be it's okay.
That's right.
But if you say that's who I am, that is the standard by which we live. And it has nothing to do with what your political party is, has nothing to do with what your socioeconomic status is. The truth of the matter is, Esther was called to do God's work and God's will living in the palace. And she used her influence to save the lives of people. So this is not about, I'll stop. I'll stop.
Well, and you know, and Bishop Michael, I would just add, that's why the church is supposed to be the container that helps us when we are taking this stand for Jesus out here in the world, we come back to the community of people who love us and care about us, and they're supposed to help us with whatever wounding we got when we were out there doing whatever it was we were supposed to be doing. And I think that's what we have just missed out on. We think, I had somebody tell me one time that she didn't want to hear sermons about things that had to do with justice and social stuff. It was okay if the priest did it in the announcements, but she didn't want to hear sermons about it. And I'm thinking, well, you don't really get what this whole thing is about, because that's all you should be hearing is about that, because this is the place where we come, like our refueling station, week after week for doing the work on the days when you wake up and say, you know what, Lord, could you just let me get up under the bed until you fix it and come and get me? Don't ask me to be a part of it. And then good and well, you got to get up and go be a part of it because you made the commitment. And that's been the motto that I've lived by since I was a kid in college. That there was a young boy killed when I was in college. A young boy was shot and killed by a security guard on my campus at Pepperdine University in Los Angeles. And we students had to take it upon ourselves to hold the university accountable for killing this young boy, having this young boy killed on the campus, and then to try to act like he was less than a person, just like we continue to see happening here in the 21st century. But the people in my church, and I was not an Episcopalian at the time, told me that I needed to stay home till the trouble was over. And I thought that they had lost their minds. I said, well, I'm supposed to be following Jesus, and I think Jesus would be right there in the middle of it. And I was like in my 20s. And broke and didn't know much. But what I did know was that I had said I was following Jesus, and I couldn't see Jesus running to hide under the bed, even though hiding under the bed could have been one option. What my church people thought it was an option. There was only one man in that room that stood up and said to me, I will come with you to school if you want me to. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. Instead of telling people to hide out till the trouble is over, or to go running under some political banner so you don't have to do anything, we need to be saying, I'll come and be with you. I'll come and stand with you. I'll come and walk in the street with you to protest the murder of Black and brown people. I will be a presence. I will come and be a presence with you in the midst of whatever these structures are that are trying to denigrate and dehumanize people, instead of hollering politics so that you get to fold up your hands and go somewhere and be comfortable. And so I think everything that we are called to do as Christians is about spiritual formation. Mm-hmm. It is about your life with God, whether you're talking about voting or writing a piece of legislature, or if you're talking about protesting in the street or taking soup to some sick person. It's all the same thing. Yeah. Because you are doing what God has called you to do. And when you start setting up little categories and putting some stuff here and some stuff there and some stuff over there, you're playing a game that you don't get to play. Because it's about your spiritual life with God, period. And that's how I have characterized the work of racial healing, because people want to put that in some box. So I can do it if I feel like it, and I can do it on the days that I feel good, and then I can leave it on my bad days. No, it's always about, am I being obedient? God has called me. I said I wanted to follow Jesus Christ. And so you don't get to keep negotiating that. Yeah. The baptismal covenant is not a document to be negotiated. You either accept it or you don't. And if you don't, you don't. But tell me you don't. Tell me I want to be in a social club. And I think a bunch of folks need to go to the spa on Sunday morning instead of coming to church, because they would be better served by sitting in the sauna and getting some exercise, because they would feel better than they are going to feel when they come sit in the church house, because they don't want to hear what Jesus has to say to them that day. And this is not trying to be ugly. I just think you need to go where you could be better served. Because if you just want to kind of feel good and that's all you're interested in, the spa is a better bet than the church.
So,
I can see the sound bite. Dr. Catherine Meeks says, "Go to the spa on Sunday. To heck with church."
That's not what I said.
I know. I know.
well, Bishop Curry, you preach about love all the time. And it sounds like Dr. Meeks is talking about some tough love.
Oh,
So
yeah.
love, what kind of love do you ascribe to? And do we have to do a bit of tough love to get people centered and focused on what the real mission is?
Sure. I mean, I love my children, but my love especially when they were younger. Now, I mean, they're grown now, so I don't have that much control over them anymore until they want money. But but when they were young children, love didn't mean that you let your children do anything.
No.
Love meant that you help them accept boundaries, that there are limits. There are some things that are acceptable and some things that are not. And when you do things that are not acceptable, instead of a reward, you have to experience some kind of punishment. Now, I don't mean physical abuse or anything, but some, time out can be, anyway, there are ways that you do. I mean, so love has never meant this sappy stuff. It has actually meant, if it is not sacrificial, if it is not unself-interested, if it is not seeking the good and the welfare of others, it's not love. It's not love. It's selfishness playing a game. And that's, and so that, I'm aware it is, imagine for a moment that you're in the corporate world. Somebody asked me that. And they said, what does love look like there? And I said, well, I'm not in the corporate world, so I can't tell you specifically, but I can tell you what it looks like in general. And then you got to apply it. It is living and doing business, not simply about me, but about we. And I don't mean we as my little group, but doing business in such a way that we are bettered, that the world is bettered, that our society is bettered. And you can make money. It's not about that. But it's got to be, if it's about me, and me meaning my group, or my class, or my race, or whatever it happens to be. If it's just about me, then that's not about love. But if it's about we, how we can leverage our influence, how we can accomplish social good in what we do, how we can actually leave the world a better place because we passed here, because then, as the old song says, if I can help somebody along the way, then my living will not be in vain. That's got to be the refrain. I don't care whether you were in the corporate boardroom or if you're in the classroom. I don't care if you're digging a ditch, or in prison. Is it about just me? That is self-destructive. But if it's about we, a life lived about we is a life worth living. I mean, and I know it sounds naive. I know. And yet, Dr. Meeks, you know as well as I do that the naive is to believe that the other way really works. Because the young people, protesters and Black Lives Matter, by and large, they weren't hurting police officers. They were complaining when some police officers misused their power to hurt people.
Yes.
But the folk we saw on January 6th, who said it's not just Black Lives Matter, but Blue Lives Matter, 145 police officers were wounded and hurt that day. One died, or several people died. One police officer. One had a heart attack, survived, but had a heart attack. And they know what happened. Hatred and bigotry and lack of concern for others is ubiquitous. It may start with somebody in this one group. But trust me, it will mutate and expand. That old Martin Niemöller quote from the Second World War, they came for the Jews, but I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't say anything. And they came for another group. I didn't say anything because I wasn't, and they came for another group. I didn't say anything. And then they came for me, and there was nobody left to speak for me. That is the reality of that kind of living. So it's not naive to talk about the kind of life that Jesus of Nazareth calls us, challenges us to do. That's not naive. Pilate was naive to think that his way of the world really is going to work. It doesn't work.
And look where it's gotten us.
Exactly.
Look where it's gotten us. I mean, how many folks have we killed in wars because every war was going to be the last war?
Yeah.
And then until somebody got mad enough to want to kill somebody again. But I want to say something about accountability, Bishop Michael, because I am totally committed to the notion that people should be held accountable. But I think that we have to be careful as people of faith not to allow ourselves to get pulled into the judgment, vengeance space when we're talking about that. Because as I sat and watched those mostly white men, I think that there were some women, but there were far more men than women, at the Capitol the other day, I want to tell you what I saw. I saw a bunch of scared, pitiful people, broken. They didn't even look healthy. I mean, just externally, just looking at them, they didn't even look healthy. They probably don't even really take very good care of themselves. And I found myself saying, I wish that they could hear about love and they could be more loving toward themselves and know that this is not how you solve problems. So the part of me that's capable of compassion was extended to them. On the other hand, every single solitary one of them needs to go to jail. They need to be held accountable for their bad behavior. And I think that's where we get caught. We either want to just be judgmental and vengeful. Because I was telling one of my friends who happens to be African American about my response, and they got mad at me because I was being compassionate toward the insurrectionists. And I said, if I don't watch it, I will become just like them.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be vengeful and judgmental and hate-filled toward them, how does that make me different from them? Because I'm not scaling the Capitol wall, is that the only difference between us? That can't be. You know, Jesus would be compassionate toward them, and Jesus would hold them to accountability.
Yeah.
But to do both of those things is much more costly than just finding you a place to camp out. And that's why fundamentalism exists, because people are running from dissonance. You know, it causes dissonance to have to hold both of these things. You know, do I want to go to lunch with one of those insurrectionists? Not necessarily, but if God puts that on my plate, then I will. The point is that to live following Jesus Christ, as we've been saying all the time, it makes you different. It makes you become, it's very countercultural.
Yes.
You know, for me as a Black woman to be sitting saying, I can see these white men who are broken and sad and sick and need help. I'm not supposed to say that. I'm not supposed to be willing to have that much compassion toward them. But that's what Jesus Christ calls me to do. And then on the other hand, and I'm not saying, oh, well, because they are pitiful and sick, they need to get away with this. No, they don't. They need to be, I hope they find every single one of them, and that everybody who was a part of that gets held accountable. And then I hope that they find some people who care about them, who love them, who help them to understand this is not how you solve problems. You don't go hurt other people and go destroy property and go do all this awful stuff they did that day as a way to make yourself feel better, because they're not going to feel any better anyway. They don't feel one bit better, not really. Way down in the core of where their brokenness is, they don't feel any better. Because that's not transformative. That behavior is not transformative. And that's our job as Christians, is to understand that and to be able to speak to it and to be able to be building a world where those people can encounter love somewhere, somewhere along the way, because you have said it over and over and over, Bishop Michael, since day one, that love is it. That's all we've got. It's the answer. And you're not talking about this Valentine's card and Easter card and Mother's Day card love. You're talking about that very rigorous, cuts to the quick, transforms you and transforms the people who are engaged, who you engage with. Nobody was ever the same after they encountered Jesus. You know, I mean, you did not have an encounter with Jesus and go away from it being the same.
No.
You know, but people wanted to be around him. Wonder why? Because folks like to encounter authenticity. The energy of authentic love is so much more powerful than all this other stuff that we have named as a way to relate and to be acceptable and all that stuff. It just boils down to just be a real person with God living in you, and you're being willing to take people into your heart. You know, Howard Thurman says, we've got to keep our hearts as open doors, a swinging door, so people can come and go, you know, because the only place you can find refuge is in another person's heart.
Yes.
And just think how transformative that is when you know that somebody really holds you in their heart. Yes. And you don't have to be anything except what you are. I mean, I have a few friends like that I don't have to be smart. I don't have to be funny. I don't have to be anything. I can just slop myself in and they're ready to, you know, drag myself up the steps of their heart, and they're ready to accept me. And that's what the church is supposed to be, a place where you can just barely drag yourself into the fellowship of Christians, and you are loved and appreciated. But you know, if you or I showed up half awake and slurping our speech and stuff, that people would never get through talking about, I think they were drunk, but you know, we would be so maligned it wouldn't even be funny. And we should be able to show up in any kind of ragtag shape we happen to be in and find that people will take us into their hearts. Now, when we start doing that kind of stuff, this world's not going to be the same.
Yes. That's you. Oh, no, excuse me. Now, I was just going to say, Kathy, but you have just named the difficulty of following Jesus, because you see it all. It's having to spiritually walk and chew gum at the same time, and it's not easy to love and care about the folk who assaulted the capital of this country, but yet to hold them accountable, to do both of those at the same time. I mean, that is, you know, I mean, the whole thrust of nonviolent living. Gandhi saw it in Jesus. Well, Tolstoy saw it. I mean, it's been there. It was there in the Sermon on the Mount in Jesus all along when he talks about loving your enemies. He didn't say pretend that they may not be your oppressor. You see what I'm saying? He said, but that enemy is a child of God just like you are.
Right.
And they are, even though they don't know it, as oppressed by the system you're trying to change as you are. And that's why nonviolence says you must work to change whatever has to be changed. But you must hope to change for the good your brothers and sisters and siblings who may be perpetuating that system. And sometimes they're in the system and sometimes they're not. I mean, we know as Black folk, everybody Black did not get on board with Dr. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement and the Freedom Riders early on. In fact, well, I won't say, but there was a big split in one of the major Black denominations over civil rights. And it split, and King and some of the progressive gang went one way and the other stayed in. I mean, so love is an equal opportunity employer, and foolishness is an equal opportunity employer. And the reality is either it's meant for all or it's not meant for any. And my Bible says Jesus died for us all.
That's right. That's right. And I think, you know, I wanted to say earlier with Black Lives Matter, people want to malign this movement who want to romanticize Dr. King. They need to sit down and take a deep breath, because the Black Lives Matter movement is the 21st century rendition of what Martin Luther King was doing. And people
Yes.
didn't like Martin Luther King when he was doing it. He just looks better now because he's dead. And we don't have to, we can make him, as you said earlier, turn him into a Disney character. So Black Lives Matter is not, that movement is not allowing us to turn them into a Disney character right now, because they're present and we have to deal with them. But those young people, you know, most of the time when there's been violence around them, it's somebody on the outside trying to make them look bad.
Right.
Those people are trying to help us see that we have, I mean, we're willing to let people be killed in our midst and act like it didn't even happen. How many young Black and brown men and women have been killed since George Floyd and we haven't said a word?
Yeah.
Because George Floyd got our attention because we watched this horrible thing on TV and we had all this big outburst, but there's probably been a dozen people killed since that. I mean, I can think of 3 or 4 just right this minute, and you can barely find a little bit of news about it. Because, and so that's why we have to have this kind of activism, because we won't do our work. You know, I mean, it's, and so I just think that romanticizing doesn't get you anywhere. You know, I mean, I understand you might need a little break from reality sometimes. So you read something fictional and you can get off into a fantasy world, but you got to come back. You got to come back to, this is really the world and this is what we're called to. And the good news is God won't ask you to do more than God gives you the capacity to do. I mean, you know, I'd say all the time, everybody who knows me hears me say, I'm in over my head. I'm in over my head. I'm in over my head running this center and doing this work and trying to be a Christian. But that's where God wants me to be, because that is when God's strength is made perfect.
Yes.
When I'm in over my head and know that I have got to depend on God to help me do whatever it is God's asking me to do. And people with power and money don't want to admit to being weak and helpless and dependent on the God of the universe. They rather depend on their money, their power. And we got to get that notion outside of the church, you know, because God is expecting the church to depend on God's grace and mercy.
But there are some who do. And thank God Almighty, there are some who do. In the Bible, it was a Joseph of Arimathea who was a wealthy man who knew something about this Jesus, and he buried the master.
That's right.
Great risk. So this gospel is for everybody. And when you get a wealthy person who knows I'm dependent on God and I'm gonna leverage my wealth for the good of the world, you see me? When this gospel is that's what our churches need. Preach the gospel for real, not playing games, for real. It sets us all free. Rich, poor, black, white, Klansman, communist, whatever the opposite is, it will set us all free. And gosh, there's a part of me that says, why don't we get it? Don't we get it? There's some good, what the old slaves used to say, ain't it that good news? Ain't it that good? I got a plate home up into that heaven. Ain't it that good news? And it's true. And, you know, and there really is a heaven. And Jesus said, in that heaven, the devil doesn't do anything. He doesn't get away with anything. The Bible says he got kicked out. In that heaven, there's no more hunger, no more weeping, no more wailing, no more injustice, no more wrong. And then Jesus says, so if you want to follow me, I want you to pray and live like this. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done right here on earth, just like it is in heaven. We have been given our marching orders from Jesus himself to transform this earth, this world, to look something like God's heaven. And that you can do that no matter who you are. And that this isn't time for revival, but that's like you're saying, that's a decision. Do you want to follow Jesus for real? And if you do, life's different.
Yes.
Let me ask in the last few minutes that we have remaining, I'm really curious about this. Dr. Meeks, you talk a lot now about the need for healing in our country and for wellness, and that we've got to get on to this. We've got to get on with getting well. And Bishop, you talk about love as that agent for healing and wellness. So what I want to know is, we know that trying to get to that love place, that place where we love everybody, first, is that unconditionally? And second of all, Is that the cure? Is that the healing agent for, and will that get us to the wellness that we are so in need of at this time?
Well, let me just say, and I'll say this really quickly because we are running out of our time here. The first place that wellness begins to happen is inside of us, when we start confronting ourselves and paying attention to all of our disparate parts. And again, we don't talk enough about the necessity for people to have inner community conversations, because a lot of what we see out here in the world has to do with how we see ourselves and what's going on inside of ourselves. So we don't talk about psychological stuff. Again, we label that another thing over here rather than about spiritual formation and getting well. Mental health, spiritual health, physical health, they all go together. I mean, you can't be a well person if you don't have all of this. But we don't talk about it that way. We tell people to go be forgiving, but we don't talk about, first you got to be willing to forgive yourself. You got to be willing to forgive yourself for your shortcomings, for your lacks, but you got to know what they are. You've got to be willing to interrogate yourself and see who lives inside of you. And there's not enough emphasis put up on finding out who you really are. So you end up just living projections. You know, if we could get rid of all the brown people, I'll be okay. No, you won't, because you've got these parts of yourself that you're trying to deal with by getting rid of somebody out there. If all of them left, you still got what's in here. And if you didn't deal with it, you're not going to be any better off. So, but we don't, so I'm really lobbying for balance, and let's look at ourselves mentally, spiritually, and physically as whole human beings. That was the thing about Jesus Christ. He was integrated. He knew who he was. All of that talking about who his father was, and where he knew exactly who he was. Right. And that is that's the ground you've got to stand on. And that's shaky ground for us, because we don't spend enough time. I mean, our mental health issues in this country are just mind-boggling, because we don't hold that up as being important. And we don't hold it up as being important in the religious communities either. It's like, you're supposed to be okay. You know, if your leg is broken, we will come in, we don't expect you to walk. But if your soul is broken, we expect you to function. And you can't. Yeah. You know, so, and love would make us, real true love would make us be able to let people have, to bring your broken soul. Can you bring yourself with your broken soul and your broken leg? And we will be willing to help you find bandages, is what I want to lobby for.
Amen. I'm not sure what else I can add to that except say amen, glory, hallelujah. I think you're absolutely right. Really,
yeah.
You know, I'll go back quoting that old hymn. I guess I'll go to my grave quoting it. You know, if you cannot preach like Peter and you cannot pray like Paul, you can tell the love of Jesus, how he died to save us all. Mm-hmm. He died not for himself, not for what he could get out of it. Mm-hmm. Died for the good and the well-being of others, of all. I think Dietrich Bonhoeffer said Jesus was the man for others. Mm-hmm. And living a life like that seeks the good. It seeks to bless the we. And when I bless the we, me gets blessed too. Mm-hmm. You see, when we bless me and only me, there's no room for we. Mm-hmm. But when I bless we, us, when I'm a blessing to us, I'm getting blessed as well. And that's what Jesus did. And that's the balm in Gilead that can heal the sin-sick soul. And it's true. I met a man some years ago, about 2 or 3 years ago. I was doing a diocesan visit, and it was after the dinner, the convention dinner. And people were coming up, shaking hands, doing selfies. Remember selfies? We haven't been able to take selfies in a while, but this is when we could take selfies, when we were actually together. people were doing that kind of thing, and he was standing there, and I noticed him. He was a tall white guy and had a beard. Was kind of a John Brown looking character. He was a big guy, and I noticed him, and everybody else was smiling, and he wasn't smiling. And I was just aware of him, didn't know what to make of him, but I was aware of him. Anyway, when he finally came up, and we only had like maybe a couple of minutes to talk, if that much, because there were other people in line as well. And he said, I just wanted to come up and I wanted to thank you for being my brother. And I said, well, you're my brother too. And he said, you don't know what that means to me. He said he had grown up, I don't remember where, it was somewhere here in the South, but I can't remember where. His family had been actively involved in the Klan. His grandfather was big up in it. And he grew up being taught that at its root, Christianity was about racial supremacy. Frankly, the word love never was mentioned. And he said he went to school, went to college, and he was living in some town somewhere in Arkansas. I have no idea where it was. And there was a little bitty church, a kind of classical little white church building, an Episcopal church, somewhere in Arkansas where he lived. And he said those folk took him in. He just walked into the church some Sunday. They took him in, and he said they just loved me. And when I told them who I was and my story, they kept loving me. And he said they showed me that Jesus is about love and that we're supposed to live that way. And he said, I haven't been the same since. He said, that's all I wanted to tell you. I'm so glad you're my brother. Catherine, that's and those folk in that church may not know what they did. They may have no idea. And, but that's the church at its best. That's transformative. And that's what we're about. And when we're real, like you say, when we're that.
Taking people into your heart,
yes.
Making space for people to be, inviting people into your heart is genuinely, whether it's a 2-second encounter in the grocery store line or a 3-hour encounter sitting on a park bench talking to somebody, letting your heart be open to them. And that's the hardest work to do, but it's the simplest work. And you don't have to be educated. You don't have to be wealthy. You can be poor. You can be illiterate, but have an open heart. Your heart you can work on your heart being open. That's what God wants us to do, to open our hearts to God. And then our hearts will be open to God's children, because everybody on the planet is God's child.
Yes, everybody. I have been practicing. I got to a point, when we were still flying, of making sure I was speaking saying thank you. The good manners we were taught, actually doing it with folk, because it means something to a flight attendant when you thank them after the flight, because you have no idea what they've had to put up with human beings on that flight. But that's knowing right. They probably had, so saying thank you saying thank you for the pilots, thank you to the airline attendant, thank you to the folk at carrying the bags, thank you to the folk getting thank you, just be because that's an acknowledgement of their humanity. And it's a spiritual practice to actually have to do that, because my instincts are to keep running and ignore people. Actually, they're not. I'm more of an extrovert. I like to talk to people anyway. But but those simple acts of just human decency and kindness and courtesy. One of Dr. King's teachings in his 10 Commandments for nonviolent protesters, the first one was, before you march, read and meditate on the life and teachings of Jesus. And the second one was, treat everyone with the ordinary standards of human courtesy.
Yes. Yes. And I want to say thank you, Bishop Michael, for being the person you are and making it and leading this church in the way you do. And because your leadership makes it possible for me to be the brave, outspoken person that I am. It helps that a lot. And I'm so grateful. I am deeply grateful for your support and your voice and your willingness to do the best you can to follow Jesus Christ. I know it's not easy in this institution because it is what it is. But I just so appreciate you and thank you.
Well, I thank God for you, because you have, I don't know if we got time. Kathy came on, but thank you, Dr. Meeks, because you have been to us and shown us how to be both pastor and prophet at the same time. And that is an enormous gift, because it's so easy to just be prophet thundering forth righteously and not pastor caring compassionately. And
Well,
you do both. That's Jesus. And
thank you.
thank you for all you're doing, helping us.
Yeah. I want to keep on being faithful. That's all.
Yep. Yep.
I'm going to ask you one final question. We are indeed grateful to both of you. Both of you are such gifts to all of us. But I want to know, what keeps you motivated? What keeps you moving? Because you see all the same things that we see. And I know that it's a profound belief in Jesus. But there have to be moments when even you're questioning, what am I doing this for? And how do you respond to that?
I just stay honest with myself. I know that I'm not capable of doing what God is asking me to do, except that God meets me on the street and helps me to do it. And I'm not trying to fool myself about that God's strength is made perfect in my weakness, and my weakness is significant. And I also have rheumatoid arthritis, which is a serious limitation, and a reminder every day that I'm totally dependent upon God and God's people who will take me into their hearts. And, there are days when I get sad and upset like everybody else. And then I know I got a little bit of time to spend on that, and then I got to get up and go do what I'm supposed to do. I mean, I think that's the other piece. It's about intention and being honest about your limitations, and not forgetting that I'm here, I'm God's vessel, and I'm like everybody else, the wounded person I found a bandage closet with a few. I know where some bandages are, and I'm willing to wear those bandages and share with other people, but I'm just wounded like everybody else. And I'm clear about that. And I'm not going to let people put me on some pedestal somewhere. I'm going to always be confessing my shortcomings, because it's God's grace. That's the only answer. Only answer for my sitting here, for my being who I am and do what I do. It's God's grace. That's it. And I'm really clear about that.
The same. I mean, I one thing I'm learning, I guess is a better way to say it. I don't know who said it. I don't know if it was Thoreau or Emerson or who, but said the unexamined life is not worth living. And anyway, it was one of the transcendentalists, I suspect. And I don't know exactly what they meant by that, but I know what I hear in that. That I carry on a conversation with myself. I don't keep a diary in any consistent way, so I don't write it all down and that. But I do talk to myself a lot, and a lot of it is, so what's going on with you right now? Why are you feeling funky, or what? You know what I mean? To literally a conversation with myself. And I do that a lot. And I've found myself doing that more in this time of pandemic, because I'm much more secluded. And I'm not saying it's always fun, but there's there is something to having the conversation that has the potential to even hold yourself accountable with yourself. It doesn't always work, but it does. I mean, I just have to admit that's something. I mean, I have to admit I didn't consciously start doing that. It's just something that's evolved, and because you have your ups and downs, and feelings come and go. Feelings aren't rational; they just come, and so they just are. And so you have to think, well, where'd that come from? There may be a reason it's coming. Why was I feeling that? Why was that? I have to admit, I found helps having a few close friends, like Dr. Meeks was saying, who know me well. Some clergy that I've been in a support group with years ago. We've stayed in touch. We can call each other to account. They know when I'm jiving. I know when they're jiving, and that helps. And I have to admit, I've been going deeper in the Bible. I mean, I've always been, but I mean, I'm finding myself. I remember reading this essay or something by Karl Barth called "The Strange World of the Bible," and I think I'm seeing what he was talking about. It's like there's a strange world in the Bible because the people in the Bible are really they're screw ups most of the time. I mean, they really. I mean, it's not. I mean, and we put them in stained glass windows, but good God Almighty, they were. I mean, and so sometimes when I really listen to, wait a minute, what's read between the lines, kind of do some midrash between the lines, and say, wait a minute, I know exactly what was going on with that. I feel a little bit better. Maybe I don't know if it's misery loves company, but there's a part of me that says, okay, this is a human thing, and God's been working with humans this long, and if God could help Moses overcome his stammer and say, "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go," if he could help David in spite of his sinfulness, if he could help Peter in spite of his jiveness, if he could take a arrogant Paul, and he can do something with Michael Curry. And it's like that strange world of the Bible is strange because it's real.
Yeah.
When I take it off the stained glass window or off the pedestal and just listen to it. And there's amazing grace. I've known it, and I've known it. I've found myself doing things that I know I don't have the power. I just don't. I mean, I have gifts. We all have gifts. I know that. But I've found myself doing things that I know I didn't have the strength or the wisdom or the brain wattage to do. I went to my first meeting of the primates of the Anglican Communion after we had changed our marriage canon in 2015, after having a subdural hematoma. And, you recover from a subdural hematoma over time. But I had to go through physical therapy and occupational therapy because I couldn't write my name. I went to the meeting to represent the Episcopal Church as its primate, the Archbishop of Canterbury and all of the primates of the Anglican Communion, many of whom were upset with us. And I couldn't even sign my name. And I was able to do it. And I'm here to tell you, Michael Curry did not have the brain wattage. There had not been enough healing in my brain. The surgery was a month before. I was able to function because there were people praying. And I know that God's power is made great in weakness. And I know I'm weak. And that was a moment when I knew it and couldn't play any games about it.
Wow.
Well, I want to say, I think that's all the time we've got for this extraordinary conversation today. But I, from the bottom of my heart, want to thank you all so much. I think that we've learned a lot about what God's grace can do in the world, how we can all be impacted when we're willing to open up, make ourselves be vulnerable to the living Spirit of God, and how that can motivate us to make change in the world, very necessary change, to have the courage and the power to do that. So I want to thank you, Bishop Curry and Dr. Meeks, for spending time with us today. And thank you for this very, very inspirational message. Stay safe.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you.